Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film review show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. It is March 7th, 2023, and this is one of the biggest shows we do all year. We are finally counting down our favorite films of 2022. It's an episode you look forward to every year. It's our top 10 films of 2022. Hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts here for the No Name Cinema Society. I'm here at my home in Los Angeles. I'm chilling. I've got James Dean. He's sort of pointing at me saying, hey, this guy. This is the 8th edition of our top 10 on the No Name Cinema Society, so that's very exciting. And it's our 391st total video, including vlogs, since we started this show on February 20th, 2015. With that said, things did not go as planned in 2022. We had some new ideas of things we wanted to do, but those took a lot more time and effort than we had anticipated. We added to our collection of commentaries with our full-length analysis of the film Fury from 2014. And also, we started doing live readings of classic films, namely the films from our 1942 in review, films like Mrs. Miniver, The Magnificent Ambersons, Larceny Inc., Woman of the Year, 49th Parallel, etc. As rewarding as that project was, it was also significantly more work than any of us had anticipated. The result was we had no real regular season, all the individual movie reviews that we do. So you haven't seen us for a long time. It's a bummer, and we have to reevaluate our plans for 2023. But in spite of that, we're still here to wrap up the year in cinema, the top 10 films of 2022. So here's our schedule for the next couple nights. In addition to tonight, we have 2 more shows coming up in the next few days. Nothing we do is bigger than these shows, a comprehensive look back at the year in cinema. Obviously, tonight's top 10 films of 2022. Tomorrow night is our Oscar preview, where we predict who we think is going to win, who should win, and who should have been nominated in many of the categories. And on Thursday night, March the 9th, will be our 1947 review, in which we reevaluate films in the Oscar races from 75 years ago. Now I've got a couple superhero co-hosts to introduce you to, including one that's doing their first ever show. We were going to introduce her at part of the regular season, but we didn't have one. So you get to meet her in the top 10. Both are doing the top 10 show for the first time. First, ladies and gentlemen, a simple drunk man on the Western Front who loves his donkey but hates both Elvis and Marilyn Monroe, at least in this universe. Ladies and gentlemen, Max Fauno is back.
Wild cheers and hurrahs for those who are listening.
Thank you, Max. And now it's time for me to introduce for the first time on an official show one of our newest members. She's a controversial orchestra conductor who wants to trade in her baton for a 16mm camera that she will use to film her family of murder mystery solving fighter pilots. Melanie Rishho is here.
Hello. Couldn't have introduced myself better.
Welcome to the show, Mel, and Mel, Max, Mel. You guys can meet each other. We're going to spend the next 90 minutes or so, breaking down the films of 2022 and probably get into a lot of fights, Max, right? That's what we do around here.
Oh, absolutely. I look forward to it.
All right, let's see what's next on the script here. Oh, it's a drinking game. The fans send us things that you would drink to when we do them on the show. Anytime I say contrived, contrivance, verisimilitude, all time, or diegesis, and anytime Max does mime or funny voices, you guys are supposed to drink on the show. There he is. He's doing some mime, so you can bust out the drinks. Right. Mel, it's Mel's first show, so the fans don't have anything for you, Mel.
I have suggested things, and you've been resistant to them.
Well, I mean, yes, but I mean, I think now that you're on the show, like if you do something funny, the fans will let us know.
All right, okay.
Is anybody drinking with me? I've got a Legion Space.
I am for the first time. I will be, but Brady is fixing my drink currently.
Brady is her husband, ladies and gentlemen. For the audience, can you tell us what he's going to fix?
Yes, he is fixing a homemade old fashioned. Can you hear it?
Sound effects and everything. Max, are you drinking anything?
I had a cup of tea, and it's kind of empty now, so not really.
All right. Well, it's going to be a long night if you're not going to have any anything to hydrate you over the course of the evening. So you don't have your drink yet, right? So I can't cheers you. Quick, bring in the props. Oh my gosh. Max, she needs you to vamp.
So anyway, folks, for those who are listening,
this is my little old-fashioned.
There we go. Cheers, Mel, and cheers to the listening and viewing audience for our top 10 films of 2022. That hits the spot. All right. Let's see what's next. Now that we've done our drinking, now the first is where we talk about how many movies we watched out of the films of 2022. Here is a chart that shows how many films were watched per year by various members of the No Name Cinema Society. Every year we've done the top 10. If you discount the original members who regularly hit triple digits, the most ever outside of myself was last year when Matt Polis hit 73 films in 2021. The lowest ever is Alex in 2019, whose top 10 came from 23 total films. Hopefully these guys will beat that. We derived the list from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, their approved list, and that had 302 films this year. That's 20 more than last year. And so let's see how these guys did. Out of those 302 films, let's see how many they watched. Mel, you're first. How many did you get to this year?
24.
24. I'm surprised because you go to the movies regularly, it feels like.
I feel like I watched so many movies this past year, but not that many of them were from 2022, I guess.
I guess so. All right. So that's interesting. So that just narrowly beats Alex. Max, what do you got?
Guys, I kind of shouldn't even be here. I'm just an outcast. For 2022, relentlessly low, incredibly low number 14.
14, a new low, all-time low. So I don't know if they even want to know how many I watched, but I'm going to tell them anyway. I saw 100 of the 302 films from 2022. So, historically, there's very rarely crossover in our list, and only twice in history has a film appeared in all three lists. So it seems unlikely that's going to happen tonight. Since I wonder out of the 14 you watch, Max, and the 24 you watch, Mel, if there are ones that I didn't watch. It'd be funny if like that.
I highly doubt it.
I highly doubt that.
Out of those you watched, that I missed some of them. That's fascinating. So the next thing that we do is a fun thing. The fans sort of like it. I've got these little index cards here with their name on it, and so basically what happens on the other side of these cards is my prediction on what these guys' number one films are going to be. And I do this every year. Last year, for the first time ever on a top 10, I correctly predicted someone's number one film. When I guessed Matt Polis' choice of The Lost Daughter as his number one film of 2021. So that was the first time it happened on the top 10 of the year. I did also correctly predict George's number one film on the top 10 films of the decade that we did in March 2020. So it's very rare to get it right. But the film I put on these cards almost always is on the person's list, but it's likely not number one. The next thing is biggest movie missed. Mel watched 24, Max watched 14. If they could watch one more, what would it be? What do they feel like they missed out on? Max, you're first.
There were a bunch of them, really. 14 is not a lot of movies.
Pick one.
Return to Seoul.
Mel, what's one that you would like to watch that you didn't get to?
The Whale and Living.
The Whale and Living. Okay. Both of them are Best Actor nominees, so I imagine they'll come up tomorrow night in the Oscar preview. So for me, there was a couple, and I say a couple because because it was released in theaters too late and I didn't get to go to the theater. There's a documentary called Turn Every Page about author Robert Caro and his editor, Carl Gottlieb, I believe his editor's name is. I really wanted to see that documentary and I didn't get to because of lack of availability until the last minute. And the other one was a film called The Atom Project on Netflix. That's one that I could have watched. And if I had one more, that's what I would watch. Now it's time for disclaimers, and I'll start here. So every year I remind you folks that I march to the beat of my own drummer on these things, and proudly so. Like everyone's favorite films of every year, like the big Oscar nominees and the films that everybody talks about are often not the ones that I enjoy. Hopefully that's what makes the show interesting, give you some other options. I know how difficult it is to make a film, and all of these filmmakers should be proud of even finishing a piece of art and getting it to market. That is a major accomplishment. Once it's out there, it doesn't belong to them anymore. It's a piece of work that affects me in different ways, and part of the fun of movie watching is sharing how it affected you or didn't with others. The important thing to both you as an audience and these guys as my co-hosts is not to take anything I say personally, and I will do the same. So if I say something negative about a film that you love, it's not an attack on you. It's not about you at all. It's comments I prepared before I knew that you loved it. And I do think it's our responsibility to the audience to share dissenting opinions, if there are any, and Max has been no stranger to that for me over the years. I disliked the majority of films I saw this year, so chances are I will dislike some of the films that are on their list. Before we go any further, I want to give you guys, do you guys have any disclaimers that you want to say before we move on to the top 10?
I will say I echo everything you said. Obviously, like, it's so hard to make a movie, and I respect all these movies, but I have qualms about every single movie on my list. Even my top one, I have a very big qualm about it. I'm on the same page of this year. There weren't a lot of movies I loved, actually.
Yeah, there were two movies that I wound up absolutely loving, but I like all the ones in my top 10, but there are two that I love. Max, any disclaimers before we move on?
I don't think there are many disclaimers. I actually thought there were some really solid movies this year. Granted, I've only seen 14.
I mean, like, I definitely liked at least 14 of them. Ladies and gentlemen, the countdown begins. The audience is pulsating with excitement. It's time for number 10. And Max, you get to go first. Yes. Number 10. What is your number 10 film 2022?
Oh my gosh. My number 10 of 2002, bear in mind, of 14 movies, is Causeway. I did think it was a flawed film, but I really appreciated the film's simplicity. I thought Jennifer Lawrence was surprisingly strong. Not that she hasn't been before, but it was sort of a return for her. I thought all the acting was excellent. There was something about it that felt fresh. I liked it.
The one thing that stands out to me about Causeway is Jennifer Lawrence's performance. I know Brian Tyree Henry got nominated, but I would have nominated her. I actually also would have nominated the mom, Linda Emons. To me, it's a very acting-heavy movie. And I'm not saying Brian Tyree Henry is bad. He's not. He's very strong. I just had 5 supporting performances that I liked a little better than him. I mean, in terms of the rest of the movie, like it didn't really capture my attention. Like it was, I just feel like it was a little, it was an acting heavy movie. There was a lot of good scene work. There was a very strong lack of cinematicism. It was basic and it was maybe a little too slow for its own good. Maybe some of those scenes were a little too pregnant, a little too much air in some of the scenes where that starts to become stylization. Borderline. I don't think it's a bad film, sort of middle of the pack for me in the 100. But I mean, the things that stood out to me are the things you talk about. Great performances. And Jennifer Lawrence, cannot believe people were not talking about her in terms of a Best Actress possibility this year.
Yeah, I would agree with just about everything you said. Yeah.
All right. And Mel, what about you on Causeway?
I did not see Causeway.
Then we can move right along. And Mel, you know, you've been scared about this moment. It's now time for your number 10 film of 2022.
Okay, I have landed on Banshees of Inisherin. I love the premise of this movie. I'm sort of obsessed with the idea that it's presenting. And I enjoyed it. I had fun. I don't think it was executed as well as it could have been. I had some performance issues actually with Colin Farrell. Again, I had some issues with the direction of it and mostly just the story at the end. And I had strong opinions of how it could have ended to hone in on the theme and the question of the movie on an even deeper level. But at the end of the day, I'm really interested with the ideas it's presenting. It made me laugh. I thought it was really kind of interesting and unique. I had a good time. So yeah.
Max, what about you and Banshees of Inisherin?
I loved it. I thought that was a great rundown, Mel, of the film. It was a film I really, really enjoyed. And I had also the hardest time with Farrell's performance. He was kind of really stretching to play the nice guy.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I felt like he kind of stuck out.
She's got Banshees of Inisherin, and now it's time for my number 10. And interestingly enough, my number 10 film is the film that Max, he would have watched if he had one more. I've got Return to Seoul as my number 10 film from 2022. I was immediately drawn in by the enigmatic characterization of Freddy, constantly in a state of liminality based on culture and genetics. I was consistently engaged in the character study element of it, partially due to the tremendous performance by Park Ji-min, who delivers surprising moment after surprising moment, but each one believable. She makes silences as evocative as any other actress did this year, and when she does speak, she can do so in 3 different languages. I liked a lot of the color schemes and design elements that were strong without calling too much attention to themselves. The film beautifully captured the psychology of an adopted child, the feeling of being unwanted, the disillusionment of self, the self-sabotage, and it also captured the concept of an identity crisis related to being cross-cultural. So it landed the big ideas in several memorable power moments. Only the length and possibly over-ambitious nature of the narrative holds this one back. Otherwise, some really fine work, I think. I've got Return to Seoul from director David Chow. We know that Max didn't watch it. Mel, did you?
I did. Yes. Do I talk about it now or later?
Well, I guess later.
It's on my list, but I'm like,
that's a hint. All right, moving on, guys. Rolling right through this to number 9. They didn't see many movies, so this whole show can go very quickly. Number 9, Mel, what do you got for your number 9 film of 2022?
I have The Fablemans. Most movies I watched this year was like, I was very on board in the first half, and then I was like, which is how I felt about this movie. The beginning of The Fablemans, I was like very invested and very emotional, actually. I think because I was a child who wanted to make movies. Felt like watching a Spielberg movie in the theater. It was so cinematic, and you're kind of with this child and experiencing like this desire to make moving pictures, which I thought was really moving. And then I thought the dynamics it presents within his family were not hit over the head, and I was able to like pick up on them in a satisfying way and track them. My issues with this movie were in the second half, where I feel like instead of like a traditional sort of narrative that dips, it kind of did a lot of this. Like there wasn't a big enough payoff for things that were set up earlier in the movie. Like the emotional stakes didn't land as hard as I think they should have, but I still had a very good time. It moved me as a movie, and it was interesting to see something that was like personal to Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, I mean the screenplay's all over the place. And historically, Steven Spielberg is probably the filmmaker that maybe want to be a filmmaker, and so like for similar reasons, like I had high expectations, and maybe that's not fair. And that's the problem with autobiographical stuff. Screenplay structure can be thrown out the window.
Yes.
I understand the need to make personal stories. The lack of perspective in the film, to me, is staggering. There's many individual scenes that are excellent from an overall structural point of view. I think it's a disaster. It's just an anecdotal collection of moments and ideas that don't reveal anything more than a dinner table narrative. If it's supposed to be a movie about a family and inspiration, that's great. But then the second half, to your point, goes in a whole other direction, and it prevents from really exploring those things on any meaningful level. And so it feels like a significant sidetrack to me. You just say the second half because you were on board with the first half. I wonder if it was about the high school years, that would have been a fine movie on its own. The fact that he had to combine them, that caused the trouble, I think. This year featured a lot of semi-autobiographical films or autobiographical films from filmmakers. Consistently, there's this issue of closeness to the subject matter. And I think that's, for me, that was the primary issue, closest to the subject matter that hindered true thematic exploration. Max?
I have not seen it.
There are some performances in the film that I think are exquisite and extraordinary. And so I'll talk about that tomorrow night. In the meantime, Mel, do you have any rebuttal for me?
No, I actually really agree with you. Like all my issues were like structural screenplay. And you're right, the second half just felt like it was disconnected.
Screenplay issues really sunk it, like tying, a heavy stone to a leg. I was pretty bummed about it. So Max said, we're done with the Fablemans. What's your number 9?
My number 9, I'm going to go with Everything Everywhere All at Once. The experience of superhero and action and fantasy and family and dealing with I think what a lot of very, very popular films are dealing with now, this sort of idea of a world within a world within a world within a world. This is a totally fresh take. I just smiled most of the time I was watching it. It was really well done.
It was a film that I was avoiding. I had a feeling I wasn't going to enjoy it, and I really, really, really didn't. I hated this movie quite a lot because I'm in the minority by far. Like, I've had people tell me it was the best film they've ever seen. So for me, I presume that people are responding to the inventiveness and originality. I personally found it empty and trite. More gimmick than grit, bells and whistles to trump truth. For something as unconventional as this, one needs to make sure that the world building is consistent, and I didn't feel that was the case here, with the screenwriters seemingly conveniently altering the rules at will to meet one goal or another. And I found the acting ultimately false, in spite of its 4 Oscar nominations. I acknowledge the variety of things each performer had to portray, but none of them were real. All were two-dimensional movie versions of people, pawns in an attempt at existential metaphor. And so for me, emotional engagement goes out the window. Where the film really succeeds for me is the craft elements, smartly shifting its style from universe to universe. Each one was distinct, visually compelling and detailed, particularly in terms of costumes and cinematography, though none of it added meat to the piece. At one point, the film seemed to want to be about the role of compassion in our corporeal forms, denouncing violence as a solution to conflicts. But then the way in which the fight scenes were shot undercut that point. Why make violence look cool if you want to suggest it's unnecessary? And then there's the existential ennui, which to me gets flushed down the toilet by how overwritten the climax is. Long speeches that were meant to be heartfelt, but came off to me more as armchair philosophy, a collection of Hallmark greetings cards thrown into a script. The missed opportunity I saw was a wasted chance to explore the role of the soul in our existence. That's where more character dimension could have come in handy, because the flat derivative nature of the characters in each of their respective universes made them feel soulless. I wanted to see more than just a cursory change in wardrobe, each Evelyn, each Wayne, each Joy, but still feel their essential self bursting through. I know my readers, viewers, and listeners get frustrated that I don't see things the way everyone else does. I don't mean to be contrarian. It would be a lot easier for me to go along with the pack, but I can't in good conscience. Mel, any comments before I let Max rebut?
I have a lot of thoughts about this movie. I also enjoyed it. I disagree with some of what you said, but I agree with a lot of what you said. It gave screen time to like a world and a dynamic that I thought was interesting. I also had a lot of issues with like Act 3 of the movie was way too long to me. It's so funny because I feel like my critique of this movie is like almost null because of the title, but I'm like, it was too many things. They were trying to do too many things. I know that that was like the point of the movie, but I'm not sure it was so effective. For me, I really don't like a messy theme. And I felt particularly at that one monologue at the end where he was like, we just need to be kind. I was like, that's not what this movie's about. And there were several moments like that where I was like, oh, that's not what this movie's about to me. It's kind of gone all wonky and it lost its spine of what it was really trying to say, but I still enjoyed it.
I also agree with a lot of what you said. I think we're aligned in the quibbles and some of the things that you liked about it. I didn't. Max, chance to rebuttal.
You know, I don't really disagree with either of you on that. Most of what you both said is quite accurate. So much of what the filmmakers was doing was very tongue-in-cheek. And if you sort of see just beyond the triteness or the gimmicks, you see how human the characters are and how sort of ridiculous so much of it was and is. You end up kind of coming full circle. At least that was sort of my experience.
All right, it's time for my number 9, guys. This is going to be an interesting one. I think it's very rare for me to have Best Picture nominees on my top 10. On the whole, my tastes have been so far apart from the Academy for years now. Case in point, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Out of the 7 years we've done this so far, there have been 13 Best Picture nominees on the 70 total films that have come out in my list. And that includes 4 last year in 2021, which is a huge anomaly. But here's the first one of tonight. A movie that I was not enjoying while I was watching it, but the excellent skill in its filmmaking and approach towards its themes stuck with me for days after, even amidst the dozens of films I was cramming in to watch the last few days. To me, Tar is about a lot of things, and that's its strength, its richness of depth. But to me, the theme that landed the most is its examination of cancel culture from the inside. What's all the more interesting is that this is someone that did behave badly as opposed to many similar films in which the protagonist's actions are misinterpreted. More than just that, though, I think the film wonders if the pedestal that we put celebrities on might be too high. The expectation is that public figures and artists need to be beyond reproach at all times. It's easy to sit in our armchairs and decide that the reported bad behavior needs to be punished, but are our own consciences clear enough to do that? It's not necessarily the boards of trustees or organizations that are doing the canceling. They are afraid of the public outcry, the mob mentality. There's more to Tar, obviously, the role of art in the artist in society, the sacrifice of a life in the arts, LGBTQ issues, and issues related to compassion. With my limited time, I'll stop there. I wasn't really moved or even fascinated, but I was consistently impressed with the depth and consistently excellent filmmaking choices from Todd Field. This is an example of a film that was more cerebrally engaging for me than anything else, and about execution. Like, I recognize the filmmaking and I recognize there's so much richness to it, even if it's not something I want to rewatch anytime soon. Mel, anything on Tar?
I loved Tar. I think it was excellently executed.
Max?
Buddy, I don't know what's up with you or me, or maybe it's Mel, but I'm agreeing with most of what you're saying, which is almost as much of an anomaly as your consistent appreciation for Academy films. I was really impressed with Tar. I definitely did not think it was flawless. I would agree with you. It's not the kind of movie I want to watch again. But I think that's part of why I liked it so much, actually, was the consistent element of how uncomfortable I felt throughout most of the picture.
Moving on. After 9 comes number 8. Here we go. Who's up first for number 8? Max. What is your number 8 film of 2022?
Number 8 out of my 14 watched, a film that I really enjoyed, although during some of it I really thought it was not working. Women Talking was something that I thought was really, really interesting and powerful. I thought it was excellent.
I mean, to me, it's so utterly free of cinematicism. It's very play-like. There's some excellent acting and a great ensemble, and it's important. I think it's very possible, at least for me, to recognize the importance of the film socially without liking the film. Because I do feel like, for me, it got to be very repetitive, didactic, and pedantic. That's where it goes awry for me. Mel.
I watched Women Talking today, and I had a very negative reaction to it, actually. Which made me sad because of what you just said, JB. The story is so important and so interesting and fascinating and tragic, but I really, really disliked the movie. I did not like any of the dialogue in this movie. I felt like none of it felt realistic to me. Even if these people are part of a community that talk differently, than maybe regular society, I didn't.
And the movie's all dialogues. If you're not enjoying the dialogue,
it's like, it's in the title, but I was like, but the talking isn't good to me. Something about it that I just didn't believe, and everyone was saying things to each other in the moment that I was like, why have they not communicated about this before? It just felt like a lot of telling and not a lot of showing to me.
If they're going to throw them all in a barn, they need to cover it differently, like 12 Angry Men style. The way Sidney Lumet directed 12 Angry Men, or even the way Mike Nichols directed Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Like those could have been templates. There's too many singles. I think there needed to be more, over the shoulders and to connect these women in different ways. I had thoughts about the dialogue, but because I don't know the community, I sort of gave it a pass. But my thing is, like, it didn't feel consistent to me. Some had a certain manner of speech that's like, okay, this is part of this community. That's how they talk. Other times they sounded a little more modern. And like one character from one scene to another would sound a little different from a dialogue point of view. And I just was like, okay, maybe because it's modern, but they have there's this hybrid thing going on there, and I just sort of gave it a pass. It was occurring to me while watching it, and I don't know if that's anything to do with what you were noticing.
Yeah, I think for me, I did feel that a little bit, but aside from even the way people were talking, it was what they were saying that I didn't believe. They were like, how would you feel if you never had any power in your life or whatever, or how would we get there if we've never seen a map? The way they verbalized realities about their life felt too realized. I was like, people rarely would talk about their own life in that way. When we cut into this story in the movie, they had already all had some realization, which would have been more interesting to watch them have the realization of their reality and how little freedom they have.
I don't think either of you are wrong in your analyzing the film. I definitely think they were wildly intelligent, and yet the sort of point of them never having gone out into the world and them not knowing what to expect sort of contrasted that incredible self-awareness or intelligence, if you will. I totally agree with you, JB. It is a play. Your examples of films that, quite frankly, are better than this are examples of amazing single location films. So if you come in near 12 Angry Men and you're dealing with a subject matter that is so prevalent today and so kind of important, you're kind of getting it out of the park. By the end of watching it, I thought, gosh, there's so much here that is not just plodding along in the same way. It is didactic, it is explaining, and it is talking literally. But it's doing it in a way that worked dramatically.
I hear you saying about those are lofty expectations with the 12 Angry Men and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but it's actually a lot easier, at least for the things that make Virginia Woolf work. Because I actually just taught Virginia Woolf to my students a couple weeks ago, and because the thing that I think brings it out of being that play is variety of shots, which is something that she could have accomplished. That is not that hard. Instead of just shooting singles over and over again, the more variety of coverage that you get in that barn, that's what makes it not play-like. So it's not like I'm asking her to do something she doesn't have the budget to do or anything like that. I felt like that was well within her purview. All right, so that's Women Talking. Max's number 8. It's time for Mel's number 8.
My number 8 is Everything Everywhere All at Once.
I've got this guy, and
so well, you're wrong. It wasn't.
Right.
Well, what I said is it almost always is on the list, just not number 1.
Yeah.
So it's gone.
I'm going to really surprise you with my top ones.
I'm definitely going to surprise you with mine. But I would say we covered this ground quite a bit. I also want to say before I let you take the floor is only twice in No Name Cinema Society history have films been on all 3 lists. Phantom Thread in 2017. And 2021 with Dune. And I know how Mel feels about Dune. We'll see if it happens tonight. It looks like it's not going to happen with Everything Everywhere All at Once. But we do have our first crossover because Mel and Max have in it 9 and 8 respectively. Anything you'd like to add about Everything Everywhere All at Once?
I was moved. I 100% felt something. I cried at the end of that movie.
Felt like they wanted me to cry. I certainly felt that.
Well, I did cry. I will say I was with two people on either side of me that cried a lot more than me and continued.
And they
to
were
cry.
men. They were
Yes,
men.
they
as
were
I
men,
recall.
and they continued to cry after the movie. We like went to a bar and immediately they're like, "That was the best movie I've ever seen," and I was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!"
Calm down, eighth best.
I say it impressed me in a lot of ways. I had a great time. It made me laugh.
Max, we talked a lot about it. Anything else you'd like to add?
Awesome that it's there, Mel. Good call.
Spoiler alert, Everything Everywhere All at Once will not make all 3 lists. I don't think I'm shocking anyone by saying that, but that's where it's added. And I think this will go quickly because I doubt either of these guys have seen my number 8 film. It's a film that came out around Thanksgiving time called Devotion. I thought it was surprisingly good. It came out of nowhere for me, and borderline excellent. I don't know director J.D. Dillard's work prior to this, but the direction is delicate, detailed, honest, and careful. One might argue perhaps too careful because it mostly avoids the maudlin traps that this movie could have easily fell into. There is inherent sentimentality, but it's not really leaned into, at least not into the very end, which was wholly unnecessary. But that's more of a coda. The flying scenes are outstanding, even better than Dunkirk. And the scene work is also mostly good with the occasional exception. Thomas Sadoski is actually the scene stealer in the film who breathes such life and depth into the CO, which very easily could have been a cardboard character. Even the music was impressive, never really over the top, which must have been a temptation. It was present, effective, but never overpowering. In many ways, this film checked all the boxes, save for one. It never really added that extra layer of cinematicness, almost the opposite of Tar in that regard. It was basic storytelling, basic coverage, but it was very good at that. And if there's one box you're going to miss, that's the one. Through most of the movie, I thought the themes were kind of the standard order: race relations, duty, and resilience, exactly what you might expect from this kind of a film. But it did sort of address the elephant in the room in a meaningful way, and that is the white savior complex so often discussed today. In many ways, it deconstructed it through the relationship between these two men and the complicated problem that, on one hand, white allies reinforced their oppression by condescending to lend a hand to their black colleagues. But on the other hand, if no one in power helped those without, there could be no advancement. The film doesn't offer a solution to that, but it does acknowledge it in a way that a lot of films prior to this had not. And that puts the film over the top for me. You know, when I wrote this in my notes, when I saw it in November, I wrote, in most years, it would probably make a latter half of the top 10. But I haven't seen much so far this year. So as of now, this rises to the top in spite of its handful of flaws. And here we are now, several months later, that I've seen more films. And here it is at the latter half of my top 10 list. I don't suppose anybody had a chance to see Devotion from director J.D. Dillard.
No, I want to now. I remember seeing the trailer and being sort of interested, but I didn't get the chance.
I also haven't seen it, JB.
That's number 8, guys. So they haven't seen it. So we're going to move right along, keep this show rolling. It's time for number 7, I believe. There it is, 7. Mel, you get to go first for your number 7 film of 2022.
My number 7 film is Triangle of Sadness. What it was exploring was really interesting and funny. Like, I thought the characters and the scenes were really honest in a funny way, even though the whole movie sort of felt surreal. It was also sort of a gross movie. Like, it's not a movie I actually feel I would want to watch again. There's a lot to go through. And I didn't love Act 3 of the movie. I think thematically it explored something really interesting, and the note that it ended on landed with me.
Fans will know that they watched our top 10 films of the decade. Force Majeure made that list for me, so I'm a big Ruben Östlund fan. There's a lot great about this movie, themes especially. It's not going to make my top 10. It's a film that I felt was good but not great. It didn't walk that tonal line to me as well as Force Majeure, that tonal line of comedy, drama, and satire. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't quite accomplish it. But I mean, like, it was trying to be so much, and like, it is an accomplishment. Like, I'm like, okay, this is a good, well-made movie, smart, very consistent in what it's trying to achieve. It narrowly missed for me on a couple of different things. Sometimes when directors get too big, they lose this. He went a little too far. And I think that you reflected that in some of your comments, not wanting to watch it again. Like, the point was well made, and then he just felt like he needed to take it up, and that would bump for me. It's a minor quibble, but enough to keep it off of my top 10. Max, have you seen Triangle of Sadness?
I haven't seen it.
Mel, rebuttal.
I think I really agree with what you're saying. I mean, yeah, as a director, like, you feel very safe in his hands. And there were some things that just pushed it a little too far for me as well. Particularly in Act 3, I was like, oh, things are feeling a little belabored, or
every little section was just a little too long, you know, for its own purposes.
Yeah, I would agree.
Like, Max, you haven't seen it, so we can move forward with your number 7.
My number 7, Tar.
Tar. So I'm gonna interrupt you again here. So hold on. Obviously, so here. So I'm on the back end of these lists. So I wasn't made both your lists, but I wasn't close. So that ends the index cards for the evening. All right. So we talked a little bit about Tar. Obviously, it was my number 9. It is currently a candidate to make all 3 lists. So we'll see if history will be made for the 3rd time. Max, is there anything you'd like to add in terms of Tar?
Not really. I think it's said. That's all she said.
Okay, cool. Time for my number 7, and it's it's an indie, so it's probably something that they didn't see because it's a very small indie. But it is a nominee at the Independent Spirit Awards, or was a nominee at the Independent Spirit Awards, and is available, I believe, on Hulu now. It's a film called Bruiser. The story is trite, but the execution is frequently excellent, mostly due to the performances, particularly by young Jalen Hall, continuing to refine his craft, and Shamir Anderson, whose deep pain was palpable, even though his character bottled it up and buried it so deep. It's the kind of memorable performance that's perfect for the cinema. Initially, I expected it to be a meditation on parenting, but it satisfyingly became about toxic masculinity and its lineage. It was often a deep and meaningful exploration of this idea, but it could have taken it a step further by even the smallest suggestion of the generation before Malcolm and Porter. It would have landed the whole thing even more, hinting at a pattern. The pattern of violence that's intrinsically tied to this level of toxic masculinity. The script is often very honest, engaging, and important. From a directorial point of view, so much of it is good. Some choices are really smart, and others less motivated. The scene work was a little heavy, a little too much air in the scenes that actually took away from the verisimilitude. And you can drink if you're a fan. I said verisimilitude. It's a fine line, and they steered too much in the other direction. I suppose I prefer that to the alternative. But just like so many other things in this film, it could have been a little bit stronger, but there's so much emotion, so many great ideas, with just the occasional misstep to hold it back from being excellent. I've got Bruiser. Is there a chance that anybody here saw Bruiser?
I did not. I would say I want to, but it's scary, isn't it? I think I glanced.
I don't think so.
Oh, really? Maybe I'm confusing it with a different movie.
Drama.
Oh, then I would like to see it.
Okay, there you go. Have you heard of it, Max?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it, though. Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to move on to keep this show rolling because God knows the audience wants to get back to their lives here. Moving on to number 6, and it's going to be Mel. What's your number 6 film in 2022?
After Sun. I kept thinking about the movie, and then for the next few days after, I realized it gave me this really somber, tender feeling. And I really love when a movie lingers with me like that. A lot of it that I didn't understand why it lingered with me in the way it did, except that it was unusual. And even I was conflicted while watching it because directorially it did things where it switched perspectives almost. And in the moment I was like, oh, do I like that? That feels weird that we're like anchored with her and then suddenly we float out of that. But again, I think it was commenting on like the way you recall a memory and how you think about the thing you weren't aware of at the time. So I think it was doing something really interesting.
My quibbles about After Sun, have a little bit to do with what I was saying happened a little bit in Bruiser, happened a lot in After Sun, and that is long silences do not make drama on their own. When scenes are too airy, it becomes stylized in a different way, and that doesn't feel as real. I felt like context in those scenes are required, and this movie frequently lost sight of that and wound up just boring me. Wells made a choice somewhere along the line to make it about the way memory deludes us to some degree. But the result is that they fail to really convey the depression in a narratively effective way. It merely hints at it, the breadcrumbs that don't lead up to a satisfying meal. Which brings me to Paul Mescal's nominated performance. Along the same lines, he doesn't really, for me, succeed in making the father's depression resonate. There's too much of him trying to play the good dad, which is a byproduct of Wells's choices. But the result is the performance is overrated. Most of Wells' camera choices were unnecessarily artsy and not really motivated, at least in any way that was clear to me. Metaphors like the hang gliders is a little forced and clunky for me. One gets the impression that she was grasping at straws, trying to convey some of the ideas related to the responsibilities of parenthood versus the responsibilities to your own mental health. A lot of the mise-en-scène, along with the use of the video camera, feels more gimmicky than motivated. If it's true that memory is untrustworthy, then Wells could have used the perspective of adult Sophie to see what she missed as a child. That extra layer of insight feels like the missing piece because as it is, I never really got invested in this particular drama. Max, have you seen After Sun?
I've not seen After Sun.
I think a lot of what you said is valid. And during it, I was like, oh, do I need more context? Am I confused? So I agree with that, and I agree with there was a lot of sort of silence in lieu of a scene. We're kind of in like floaty, vibey land, which is usually not my thing. It stuck with me in a way. I think it's sort of hard to put into words. I wasn't like 100% sold on a lot of those choices, but I sort of respect the choice because I was like, oh, that's an interesting thing to do. But I do kind of agree, like the father's depression wasn't necessarily shown in the most dramatic or honed in way. It was a bit disjointed. I don't know. I think I'm still sort of pondering this movie, but it sounds like I have more respect for some of those directorial choices than you did.
The other thing is I want to see if we can trademark floaty vibey land. I would like to make that happen.
Oh, floaty vibey land is something it's an issue I have with so many movies actually. So
yeah,
I love the scene.
It's time for Max's number 6. What do you got, buddy?
I got maybe the second or the third guess at your least favorite movie of the year. My number 6 is Funny Pages. I just loved the level of discomfort I thought that was held out throughout the film. I loved that there was so much that sort of went against the typical craft of filmmaking. I adored that literally every person in the film was not all that attractive.
You thought that means that you could have gotten a role?
I know. I was like, God, if you only knew me, dude. But it was this sort of misplaced love and career and friendship. Everything seemed so perfectly misplaced in it. So much of the storytelling was fantastic. This movie, I thought was really refreshing.
I didn't hate the film, but I mean, the things that you'd think I disliked about it, I disliked about it. But it's funny, Daniel Zolgadi, I have him as a top 5 actor in the year, like one of the top 5 best performances of the year.
From that movie?
From Funny Pages. He's extremely natural, like one of the most lived-in, natural, easygoing performances I saw this year, able to craft a complex performance. However, to me, the character is so hugely unlikable that the whole film wears thin, and much of it can be contributed to his age, but he doesn't even sniff an arc until late, and I'm not even sure about that. The great anti-heroes of all time are at least interesting. We're invested even if we don't root for them, and I'm not sure that's the case here. There's very little fun or amusing or moving or captivating about Funny Pages, but the scene work frequently borders on the awkward, as if in search of quirky and unable to really land that. Owen Klein's style is often way too tight and not in a noticeably claustrophobic way. And when I say tight, I mean shot way too many close-ups and not even medium close-ups, like tighter close-ups. It's interesting to note, however, that the best scene in the film, A, remains wide, and B, calls out the main character on his behavior. The film concerns itself about ambition, the role of art, and perhaps most important, what makes an artist. But Klein's youth is apparent in a film that doesn't really concern itself with mise-en-scène or themes. It's almost a film done on feel, with a few scattered ideas, concepts, and characters culled together in a not-so-satisfying narrative. Mel, it sounds like you also saw Funny Pages.
I did, yes. Yeah, I was a little torn on Funny Pages too. I think overall I would say I think I disliked it, but there were things I really respected about it. I mean, like you said, like all the tertiary characters were so real. Like they were like real people and very uncomfortable. Not a movie I would want to watch again, ever again. It made me very uncomfortable. Yeah, I think I agree with JB in that like I felt like there was a sequence missing at the end of the movie. He's reached the point of Act 3 where like I couldn't imagine things getting any worse, and then I wanted to see his character like shift in the smallest way.
It got to a point where not doing the arc was just dumb. Dumb for the character, like, with everything stacked against him. Oh, now it's clear you need to make a different choice here, and then he doesn't. So it almost felt like disingenuous, surprising, and maybe that's one of the things that Max liked. I don't know what words in his mouth. I was surprised, but in a negative way. So
yeah,
it didn't buy it for me.
I had a similar experience where I think it was engaging to me because I was frustrated. I was very frustrated with the main character. And
characters don't always need to change, but they need to come close. They need to like be on the precipice, I think.
I would agree with most of what you said. It a little bit interminable, the quality of the film, and it is really unsettling and discomforting, but there was something still so fresh about it. I don't know. I was happy that it was getting some recognition.
All right. My number 6 film of 2022 is coming up next. For me, like historically on the show, there have only been a handful of documentaries to make my top 10 in the last 8 years. Listen to Me, Marlon at number 3 in 2015. Minding the Gap at number 2 in 2018. Apollo 11 at number 10 in 2019. And this will be the only doc on the list this year. I had heard very little about this story on the news, but didn't really pay attention to it. So I'm grateful to the filmmakers for putting this together so I could discover the story of Navalny. Every time we review a doc on the show, I say that it's really the form and not the content that we have to look at to evaluate. After all, why would they bother making a doc if it wasn't a worthwhile story? And as far as form goes, to me, it's the template, or perhaps one of the templates towards making a great documentary. It's a combination of archival footage, interviews, and mostly unlimited access to its subject. And so it was able to create something of a comprehensive portrait of a political candidate that became a political martyr. The aforementioned access also created the opportunity for one of the great real-time surprises that can happen in a doc, so surprising that I'm not even sure I would have believed it if it were a narrative. Navalny is really interesting and very well made. I think it's exactly what you want out of a doc, and so it is my number 6 film of 2022. Did anybody get a chance to watch the documentary Navalny?
Nope.
Yet.
Yet.
I hadn't even heard of it, actually.
It is nominated for the Oscars, Best Documentary. And, spoiler alert for tomorrow night, I'm currently the frontrunner. Moving on, I can't believe we're going to the top 5 at last, ladies and gentlemen. We're halfway through. Here it is, number 5. Max, what is your number 5 film of 2022?
I predict this is possibly the second least liked JB film on my list. Number 5 for me is Corsage. I found it kind of a remarkable mashup of the period drama, costume drama that I really appreciated from other filmmakers in the past. I just thought the filmmaking was fresh, it was powerful, and I just loved how much of an anti-hero she was, and yet I could stand by her. I did think it pushed it a little bit. There was this sort of moment of extending the middle finger. I didn't quite get the irreverence.
You felt it was anachronistic?
Potentially anachronistic. I don't know. But I also wasn't sure about the last vignette, the last moment. I loved its sort of fierceness, but it was completely ahistorical as far as I understand. I really had fun.
Well, I don't hate it that much. It's one of those films that remained compelling without ever being captivating. I mean, biopics are tough and increasingly more difficult. And more often than not, the answer is to bite off only a portion of the character's life. And to its credit, that's exactly what Corsage does. On one hand, it's got this feminist component in that it shows how one of the most powerful women in the world is just as stifled, controlled, unhappy, and frustrated as all the other intelligent, restless women of the time who are wasted by the patriarchy. On the other hand, it's also about mental health and the lack of resources at the time, again suggesting waste and a life that could have been possibly spared. In this scenario, these things go hand in hand. The lack of opportunities for women certainly contributed to her unhappiness and her ennui. And on many levels, director Marie Kreutz displays a great deal of talent. Most of her choices are bold, confident, specific, and motivated. I actually liked the anachronistic music on the soundtrack until it wove its way into the diegesis. And fans can drink, as I just said, diegesis. But that was a bridge too far. But Vicky Krieps justifies the faith I showed in her 5 years ago when I named her Best Actress of the Year for her work in Phantom Thread. It's a quiet, provocative performance that is simultaneously nuanced and expressive. Every internal beat is communicated with precision. And unfortunately, it was just one of the strongest years in the Best Actress category that I've ever seen. And she did not make my top 5, but almost any other year she might have. I like a lot of the things the screenplay is trying to do, but there are times when the execution is a little dry. It had almost that British restraint that keeps the audience at an arm's length. Sometimes that works. There's a lack of manipulation there, but it's all about balance. You don't want to beat your audience over the head. You want them to care a little bit more. It was one of those films that I was intrigued by academically, but it won't stick with me. And I'm not sure it had that emotional investment that I sometimes talk about. Mel, Corsage.
I did not see Corsage.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you said.
Most of it was positive.
Yeah, exactly.
Mel, your number 5 film of 2022.
Okay, I also feel like this is going to be controversial. My number 5 is Saint Omer. This movie was so weird and unusual to me. I think what was so interesting is it was so simplistically, I feel like the shot list for this movie was like 20 shots. Like it was, and we held on like one shot for so long and it was so not flashy or gimmicky at all. It was just like really minimal in its direction. The opposite of expositional. Like, they didn't tell you anything. You had to piece a lot of things together. But I was like really on the edge of my seat the whole time. I was so intrigued. But I had a very satisfying emotional experience at the end. Yeah, sort of an unexpected, not my normal kind of movie. But I was really impressed by it and it definitely stuck with me.
I am very surprised in the sense that this does not seem like a Mel movie to the point that you made. But you did predict correctly. in the sense that it's going to be controversial. It was borderline unbearable to me. Emotional reaction is yours. You know what I mean? Like that's very subjective. I admit that this one had some important ideas floating around its narrative. I found it really boring, and the choices that they made it so. You know, forgetting about the script, the story itself had so much potential, but they chose to do it as a court case, which led to extremely long sequences of dry dialogue, which I don't think were written. I think they were taken directly from transcript, which makes it even drier. The vast majority of it was lifeless. Also, there were times when seriousness and heaviness is a stylization all its own, which I feel like I keep saying, you know, in reaction to some of your films. It's just as unrealistic as the other end of the spectrum, and that's where this film falters to me. It's mired in its own sense of self-importance. It doesn't take a detective to derive this is a film about the burdens and responsibilities of motherhood, a role that continues to be misunderstood and taken for granted. The toll that the responsibility takes on mothers is enormous historically, and only recently do we really start to understand it. All that has extreme value as a subject for a film, but the film only worked on the shadow side and blocked out the light, the joys of motherhood, which I can only presume, but I suspect they exist. So I wondered if more balance would have helped this film. So Max, what do you think about Saint Omer?
You know, not a perfect film. I also thought it dealt not just with the burden of motherhood, but also being an immigrant, being a black woman in a white man's world, the mentality of being invisible, which I find fascinating. The strength of the film, I think, is in its incredible ability to bring the audience into the protagonist's mindset and to honestly convey what someone is experiencing when they do something that is as horrific as what the protagonist did. I was so shocked at how keyed in to her experience I felt like I was. It was one of these movies that I couldn't really stop thinking about after I saw it.
It was effective for me. I mean, I completely agree. Yeah, it's like, you know, not cinematic visually in that sense. It's like we're holding on a medium for a very long time. And I can 100% see how someone would find it dry, but I was captivated. I was just so intrigued. I found myself letting go of all of these like intellectual thoughts and having just a very human experience.
Cool. I'm going to move on to my number 5 now. And so me, you know, personally, a little personal history. One of the great theatrical experiences of my life was seeing the original West End cast of The Beauty Queen of Leenane in London in January 1998. At the time, I thought Martin McDonagh was going to be my new favorite playwright, but while some of the other plays were okay, I have been historically disappointed with the films when he switched to becoming a film director. Interestingly, it's the overwritten qualities of In Bruges, Seven Psychopaths, and Three Billboards that didn't sit well with me, often feeling the quirky elements were false and the political themes heavy-handed. However, with The Banshees of Inisherin, I feel like McDonagh has returned to the form he displayed for me 25 years ago with Beauty Queen of Leenane. I still don't think he's a filmmaker. I think the writing is absolutely brilliant, though. But I also think that the film lacks any sense of cinematicism, which I think Mel sort of hinted at when she had it as her number 10. It never escapes the theatricality inherent in much of his writing. It's a very good story, well told in a very basic way, and that was enough to place it this high on this list. I have been very historically critical of Colin Farrell over the years, so I'm going to disagree with these guys in the sense I do think he was actually pretty good. I think the entire ensemble is fantastic. In a year whose films explore so much darkness, I couldn't help feel that this play tracks the slow decline of kindness and compassion, almost suggesting that modern sensibilities make it more of a weakness than an asset. I think it also explores depression and interpersonal relationships and the connection between the two. How much our self-worth do we put in the hands of others? And that brings us to perhaps its most impactful and overreaching theme, codependency. Do we define ourselves by how others see us or by how we see ourselves? In spite of the lack of cinematicness, I was riveted by the characters, the story, the themes, the writing, and that made it one of the top films of the year for me. Guys, I've got Banshees of Inisherin. We already talked about it a little bit when Mel had it as her number 10. Does anybody have anything they want to add, or do we just move on?
I will say I'm surprised it's that high up on your list for some reason.
And Max, anything to add?
Nothing to add.
It's time to drink because Max did a funny voice. And that means I believe we can move
loop.
on to the number 4 films of 2022. Number 4. Now, just to update the audience, as I said throughout the evening, historically, it's only happened twice where a film was on all 3 lists. 2017 with Phantom Thread, and last year with Dune. Right now, with 4 more left, there is a possibility 2 films could make it to all 3 lists with 4 more to go. It's never happened where you had 2 films do that in the same year. So we'll see if that happens. Mel, what's your number 4 film of 2022?
My number 4 film was Return to Seoul, which you spoke about already. I was pleasantly surprised by this movie. I felt like it was just a really honest picture of someone who's feeling a little bit lost and wounded. I appreciated that. And there were so many details about her character and the film that looking back, I realized how thematically tied in they were. Her affinity for music and how at multiple times in the movie, she hears like faint music in the background somewhere. A little detail like that, I think looking back, I was like, wow, that's so interesting because it's so thematically on point for a movie about somebody struggling with their identity or who's lived a whole life one way. And in the back of her head will always have something ringing, will always have questions about her birth family and her birth mother. The movie really moved me. It was so great to see a story of somebody embarking on this. You know, I have friends who've gone through this, and it's such a, you know, obviously I don't know, but it seems to be such just like a painful, unique experience. And I thought it was so cool to see that on screen and done really honestly.
The second of our crossovers. We've got 2 crossovers, that and Banshees so far.
We're compatible as friends, I suppose. That's what that means.
All right, and we also know that Max did not see Return to Seoul because that was the one film that he would have watched if he had a little more time. But we'll go straight to Max's number 4.
This is true.
What is your number 4 film?
My number 4 film is, and this is possibly the most controversial film I could think of. Keep saying that. The Banshees of Inisherin.
Oh my gosh! Now this is a big. I'm writing it down, but I don't need to. But this is a big moment. Third time in No Name Cinema Society history. It requires opening a new beer. Third time in No Name Cinema Society history that we have 3 films on the list. Banshees of Inisherin joins Phantom Thread and Dune. Congratulations to Martin McDonagh and to us.
Congratulations.
Like,
aye, fucking wonderful.
That does not mean we get to do Irish accents for the rest of the show. I'm putting a stop to that right now.
I actually found it very cinematic. I even thought because of the claustrophobic space that was used in the little houses, the shooting out the windows was so dynamic. The choice to put the farm animals in sort of these picturesque contrapuntal positions to the way that either Brendan Gleeson was facing.
I want to cheers contrapuntal before you go too further. I just want to acknowledge it. Okay. First time it's ever been said in the show.
Never heard that word in my life, and it's the first time I've ever heard that word.
I'm not totally sure what it means, but it's definitely a word I wanted to use.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah. I hope to use it again before the show's over.
That would be impressive. Twice in one show. We all like it, but we have a little disagreement about why. But yeah, I mean, I do want to rebut a little bit in the sense that I saw opportunities to use the camera a little bit more fluidly, add a little bit more depth in the frames. Like, I saw some things that could have been done differently. And so I hear what you're saying by some of the blocking was interesting. I just saw opportunities that could have added to it. And it's true of a lot of Martin McDonagh's films. He can direct theater, so he can do the blocking, those basic blocking, but how he uses the camera to interplay with the blocking is still something I feel like he's working on. But we all like that film. I was surprised I liked it, to be honest, because I have not liked his film work so far. Okay, so it's time for my number 4. And it hasn't come up yet this evening. And it sounds like these guys probably didn't see it. But to me, my number 4, speaking of film direction, my number 4 is a master class in the art of film direction, to my mind. One word I use on the show a lot is scene work. What I define is the relationship between the camera, the actors, and the blocking, how those choices interact, and how we make meaning when we make those choices. This film perhaps did that the best this year, with director Sam Mendes always putting his camera in what seemed to be exactly the right place to capture all the pain, the joy, the love, the lust, the hate, the shame, the struggle, and the illnesses in Empire of Light. Some of the best direction to me is often when it doesn't call attention to itself. And that happens when all the choices are motivated by the moments, the beats, and the themes. That's the true joy in the Empire of Light to me. Not to mention another transcendent performance by Olivia Colman. The themes are mostly obvious, right? Race relations, prejudice, mental illness, but also freedom. On some level, the movie theater in that film is representative of a prison that traps the characters in their current life situations. But it's really their own minds that are their jailers in very different ways. The film uncovers the seemingly obvious but often more nuanced difficulties in escaping said jailers, your own fears and perceptions. Guys, I've got Empire of Light from director Sam Mendes as my number 4 film of 2022. Did anybody see Empire of Light?
No,
Negative.
I want to now.
Yeah.
We can move right along. It seems like the only films they did see are the ones that I sent to them through my Indie Spirit Award portal.
I mean, it was helpful.
That was very helpful.
So moving on to number 3. It is Max's turn. Max, what is your number 3 film of 2022?
This was one of just a handful of movies I saw in the theaters. So my number 3 is Till. And I was a little bit concerned because I thought, well, this is potentially kind of going to be didactic. And I thought it was just beautifully made. It made it so that I kind of felt like I was there. I loved how they dealt with everything going on by not showing the white people. You felt racism in the town, the racism surrounding everything, but it was always just sort of outside the boundaries of what the film was really dealing with. The moments of grief, how do you do this? How do you put these almost Greek moments of total sorrow onto the screen? And I thought they handled it really, really well. I was concerned. I was, approached it with trepidation, but I loved the movie. I thought it was a great job overall in every way.
All your concerns about Till are basically the things that I felt about it. And it just goes to show that I think it's such a subjective thing. Yeah, like all the didacticism that you talked about is what I felt. And, I felt like there were a lot of moments that were a little overwrought, nearly every turn for me. And that's not to minimize the importance of the story or the need to tell it. But even the best stories can be told badly, like we were talking about with Women Talking. As far as the screenplay was concerned, Mamie achieved her arc by the midpoint. There wasn't anywhere else for her to go, but the film it had to finish the history lesson. So the history is important, but in screenwriting, character arcs or the lack thereof can innocuously make or break a movie. And the script felt weighed down by history. I saw the journey of activism they wanted maybe to take, but the conclusion of it was an inconvenience, it seems. Danielle Deadwyler, the actress, is clearly very talented. Moments seems to go just a hair too far. It's a heavy role, and there are moments that were riveting and moments that just tried too damn hard to be compelling. Mel, Till.
Didn't see it.
All right. Max, rebuttal, if any.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate what you're saying. For all my concern that it was going to go in that direction, I thought it just hit it out of the park. The second half of the movie, for me, was her kind of realizing that this is not just an experience for me as the character, but it had to be this experience for the world. And yes, there's this difficult weight of history, of course, but I thought it did such a great job with it.
And it's so subjective, especially this idea of what's over the top and what's didactic, what's not, and what's
true.
It's when you're when you're
Absolutely.
working with emotion that raw, it's a fine line, and so it's a very, very subjective thing. Mel, you didn't see Till, so what's your number 3?
All right, I'm about to be controversial again.
Hey.
And just controversial in that this is a doc, and I am so much a narrative movie person. But my number 3 is All the Beauty and the Bloodshed. I was very moved by this doc. I think you said earlier, JB, judging docs based on form. I feel like I don't have much of a framework. I don't know. I'm really not an expert in docs. But I also thought it was interesting, just a portrait of this artist's life and all of the pain that she's been through and how much art can be activism, and to see this individual go through so much and continue to make art during all of it, and to tie her art into activating change. I just thought it was really beautiful. And I was very emotional after it too. And I was wondering, is this a good cry or a bad cry? And it was both, which is indicative of the title. It was beauty and bloodshed. I feel like I'm crying for multiple reasons. And yeah, and I just loved seeing all the photos. I didn't know her work that well, so it was cool to see those photos tied into history. And
I mean, to your point, you said, and in the point I often talk about documentaries, try to evaluate the form, and that's my issue with the movie. Because Nan Goldin is fascinating to me. This is 8 different documentaries in one. That's my main issue. And I was frustrated with the movie in its disjointed approach. The parallel storylines didn't work for me. If you wanted a little insight in Nan Goldin to better understand her work with the opioid crisis, that's fine. But it's part biography, part political statement, and it didn't quite connect in that way. Nan Goldin's history was fascinating. That could be a great documentary. Her work with the opioid crisis could be a great documentary, but trying to combine them was almost too much. But to have basically 2 storylines parallel with each other. And they didn't seem to connect, like the moments. It was just like random time to talk about Dan Golden's past, random time back to the opioid crisis. It didn't seem to be structured, like it seemed confused. So I suspect it started out as a movie about political action akin to How to Survive a Plague, which is a documentary reviewed back in episode 45.2, and it's a fabulous documentary. And then Poitras got interested in Golden's history, and that sort of dwarfed it. Like, I feel like they lost focus. The good news is it's interesting to watch as an individual thing. I almost wish I could just watch it in pieces, and it'd be a lot more interesting, because overall, like, I feel like it's a disjointed mess, structurally speaking. But like I said, it's compelling information. The story is great, and that's true of a lot of documentaries. Max, any chance you saw the doc All the Beauty and the Bloodshed?
I did not, but it sounds fascinating.
Mel, your opportunity for rebuttal.
I think your thoughts are valid, and it was two things. Yeah, it was definitely two things, and there were points at which I was like, oh, wasn't quite bridged. I wonder if like restructuring of the doc would have helped that disjointed experience you had. But they felt tied into me because I was like, this is her life, and this is what her life is now. And they sort of like took you through, because they took you through her experience of the AIDS epidemic as well, and how she was an activist in that as well. It's just like this was almost a little too bloated in terms of her story. So I think your point is valid. It didn't bump me that much. I was still like, it was a very effective movie for me.
So you guys have both done your number 3. So it's time, whether you like it or not, it's time for my number 3 film of 2022. And this might surprise you because this is another director I've been very critical of over the years. He's a 2-time Oscar winner, but he finally made a film that took my breath away. Out of all the autobiographical or semi-autobiographical films of this year, none was more impactful to me than Bardo. Unabashedly derivative of Fellini, if only the latter were political instead of being more interested in the sexual and religious. However, its self-awareness of the origin of the style, structure, and tone prevents it from feeling unoriginal so much as it is a very understanding homage, like borrowing a tool from a neighbor to complete a task, which in this case is the story of a struggling Mexican journalist and filmmaker, inspired by, but not completely stolen from, Fellini. Almost every scene is a reference to one Fellini film or another, if not several at a time, but most scenes are extremely successful in communicating their ideas about globalism and economics, along with more personal struggles with depression, family, and existentialism. One thing the film shares with Fellini is the main character's relationship to his own art. What's new is the love-hate relationship with his home country and the problems of patriotism. That's where globalism comes in. Does where you are born determine who you are? Are you obligated to feel a sense of loyalty to that place? And in the case of this narrator, both of his homes, United States and Mexico, feel corrupt and broken, which only adds to his depression. Speaking of the narrator, Daniel Jimenez Cacho is extraordinary as an actor, fully capturing the struggles of a midlife crisis in nuanced, interesting ways. It's very much a complete performance. It covers so much meaningful ground in an intelligent and thought-provoking way. Like I said in the beginning, I acknowledge there's a derivative quality to it, which prevented it from being higher. I kind of wish there were another way to tell the story, but that doesn't mean the experience is any less fulfilling. Awareness of film history is really interesting to me. Anybody see Bardo?
I did, JB, and what you're saying makes it much more interesting to me, actually, to think about the elements that meant a lot to you. I thought it was visually incredible. It just didn't hold it for me. I had a really hard time getting through it. I'm coming at it from the reverse. I really appreciated Birdman. There were aspects of it that I adored cinematically, but wasn't for me.
All right, with that, we're going to move on, whether you guys like it or not. Our top 2 films of 2022. Mel, your number 2 film of 2022.
Okay, once again, I can't believe this, but All Quiet on the Western Front. And I'm so sorry, JB, I have not seen the original. It was very effective. It was haunting, and there's this one scene in a ditch of that movie. The whole theater was just sobbing, and it was just a very human experience to watch this movie and to know there's like a war happening right now. Just visually at the end of the movie, like what they did with the story and visually how they ended it, it sort of moves to this other character, and that I felt like was really impactful decision for me. And then showing the contrast between like the trenches and then the people making the decisions that are causing this war, I thought was effective as well.
I mean, like, my feeling on this is my first note here is I suspect a lot of this love for the movie comes from those that have not seen the 1930 American original. You've already acknowledged that. Like, it's a great book. That movie from 1930 is very important to me. And another example of me not seeing what the remake is adding to the material or making more relevant or interesting. Same with West Side Story last year. It's great source material to be sure, but I mean, I find 1917 to be a better movie from 2019. The original actually had a lot more experimentation, given it what it was, the time it was made, and usage of the mise en scène before anyone even knew what that was. This is a pretty straight war drama that covers all the same ground in terms of the infantrymen as puppets to the safer upper classes, and also the horrors of war, the brutality, as well as the futility. That's all there, but it's nothing fresh. It is hard not to judge it in comparison with the original. I just feel like if you're going to remake something like that, what is something new that you're trying to say? I suppose every generation can use some reminding, but the battle scenes weren't even that amazing, save for portions here and there. They were hardly bad, but they didn't stand out. The Hacksaw Ridge is an example of battle scenes that do stand out in terms of recent movies. Several craft elements did stand out, however, namely the very interesting score and mostly excellent cinematography. Albrecht Skook gave the only noteworthy performance in the film, which is admittedly also the best role in the original as well. That's the best performance. It's just a really meaty role. I imagine this film was a pain in the ass to make, and obviously a technical accomplishment, but there's no new insight into a novel almost 100 years old. I'm surprised it lacked the nuance that I look for in cinema in modern times, and it relies instead on the tried and true narrative and some excellent technicians, but it never came close to connecting with my soul the way the best art does, and quite frankly, with the way the original does. It's not a bad movie. There's a lot going on, but I just don't know why it needed to be made, quite frankly. Max, did you see All Quiet on the Western Front?
I have seen it, and I was quite moved. I have not seen the original film, and I did read the book so long ago that it didn't play all that largely into my experience. My issue with most war films is really unrealistic feeling of sentimentality. And this movie was virtually void of that. I felt like there was this task at hand, which was survival. We were just a bunch of humans in the trenches with these other people, and all we had was the information we were gleaning from frame to frame to frame. It was so visually compelling.
Mel, I don't know if you have any rebuttal.
Not really. I could like the earlier one better too. I just haven't seen it, and I don't watch that many war movies either. So, but I wonder if some of what I really responded to is just built into the book, the story itself.
I mean, that's my feeling.
Yeah, I hadn't been exposed to it, and I thought it was a war movie told in a really human, haunting way.
That's her rebuttal. We're going to move on to Max's number 2.
My number 2 is Banshees of No, I'm just kidding. Again, I put it twice. Saint Omer.
Ah, look at that. Number 2.
I know.
I feel validated.
Everything about it, I was like, oh no. The director is really leaning hard on form. I was so engrossed with The Woman on Trial. And this bizarre thing that at first I wasn't into, where the eyes of this actor were locked in profile. It was like transcendent in a way in terms of a performance, because I felt like it was an experience of documentarianism in terms of going deeper into this performance and going through the experience. We are reenacting, and then we're breaking through to something that really felt like it was taking place in the moment. And it really put me in her headspace. I couldn't understand why a woman would do this, and yet I was so ready and feeling for what she'd been through and what she'd done. Mm-hmm. So not a perfect film, but like in terms of, I just thought it was really brave and beautiful.
Well, I mean, we've talked a lot about it. It's been on 2 lists. I think it was number 5 for Mel, and it was nominated at the DGA for Best First Film. I didn't see that at all. Out of all the films on the list, like that was the hardest for me to get through. But that was Bardo for you, Max. So I'm the odd man out here, but I usually am.
I did know that was going to be the hardest for you.
I'm on brand anyway.
Right, right.
If you're one of those people that just jumped ahead at number 2. Maybe go back to number 5 to see what some of the criticisms of Saint Omer. They're significant. There are a lot of them. A different approach for me. Should have worked.
But I thought it was so effective as I truly was leaned in the whole time. Like I was so engaged. It was like being like, here's the thing, look at it, look at it, look at it, look at it, and understand that it doesn't make sense. And I was like, okay, I'm looking. Like it was very effective. So
do you feel like its uniqueness added to its appeal for either of you?
Its uniqueness.
In other words, like the fact that it's different, made it more interesting.
I feel like what Mel just said, I think, is an appropriate response to that question, because I feel like the intention of it was clear. The filmmaker wasn't sort of in airy fairyland. I feel like she had a very clear aim, and this was the method or the form with which she chose to execute that.
There were only 2 or 3 films that missed the top 10 that I really liked. So I would say there's 13 films that I really liked, 2 that I loved. And that's a good segue to my number 2 film of 2022, which I did actually love, but critics excoriated it. This is one of the more controversial films of the year, but I absolutely adored it. And it's another Oscar-winning director who I thought was good, but I felt he hadn't really put it all together yet until now. And I'm referring to the bold, brash, breathtaking work of Damien Chazelle in Babylon.
Oh my gosh.
Personally, for me, I think the critics missed the point. The excesses of the film echo the excesses of the period. In that sense, it could be a double feature with The Wolf of Wall Street, in that it employs a similar tone and style to capture the decadence of an industry at a certain place in time in their history. I've never seen a film that so simultaneously loved and hated its subject, namely the film industry, and I found that fascinating. Self-worth comes into play again, and it's a relationship with success and perhaps even legacy, and also the continued uncomfortable relationship between art and commerce. The dangers of the lack of moderation in all things. The price and sacrifices we make for art, or perhaps dreams and goals. The tongue-in-cheek, heightened, almost satirical tone was surprising and yet somehow perfect for exposing a certain element of hypocrisy, and in doing so, reveals the darkness behind the veneer of glitz and glamour. My only real issue is the final 6 minutes of the 3-hour movie was a bit a bridge too far, but otherwise exquisite work. I think it's an excellent, wonderful film. I adored it. And just there's just one film I adored a little bit more. Did anybody actually see Damien Chazelle's Babylon, even though the critics trashed it?
Yet.
No, I was turned off because some of my friends went to see it and they were like, I want those 3 hours of my life back.
That's too bad. I thought it was a really, really special film. And I imagine Max would probably agree with your friends. So
I haven't seen it.
But I guess I would just ask you, guys, if you ever watch it, to keep your mind open and not worry about what the critics and the friends say, because a lot of times friends, are going in with the expectations based on what the critics say, and I just thought it was really special. All right, we're gonna move on, guys. Are you ready?
Ready, Freddie?
It is time, ladies and gentlemen, for our number 1 films of 2022. And we have this little tradition here. We do a recap of all our number 1s that we've listed on the show, of all the panelists that we've had over the years. In 2015, J Money's number 1 film was The Forbidden Room. Davey Joe had Creed, and I had Trumbo. In 2016, J Money had Arrival. Davey had Silence, which was my number 2 and also made my top 10 films of the decade. And my number 1 film in 2016 was Christine, though I later swapped it with Silence when reevaluating for the top 10 of the decade show. In 2017, Ryan had 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Devin had Call Me By Your Name, and I had The Foreigner as number 1 film in 2017, which also made my top 10 of the decade. In 2018, George had Black Klansman. James had Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and I had Widows as my number 1 film in 2018, which also made my top 10 of the decade. In 2019, Alex had Honey Boy, which was also my number 6 of that year, and made Alex's top 10 of the decade. Jim had Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I had Ad Astra. In 2020, Jim had Nomadland. Devin had Sound of Metal, and I had 9 Days. And in 2021, Matt Polis had The Lost Daughter. Patrick had Pig, and I famously and controversially had Raya and the Last Dragon as my number 1 film of 2021. And that brings us to this year's number 1 films of the year. And Max, you get to go first with your number 1 film of 2022.
All Quiet on the Western Front.
I didn't think that.
So we covered that a great deal. I mean, Max, I don't know if there's more you want to say about it.
There's not a lot more. I was so taken by the anonymity of the experience and the humanity of it.
I see what you're saying, but I've seen other movies very similar in that regard, including, honestly, the 1930 original. All right, Mel, you take it away. More
Don't you want to guess
controversy.
mine?
Your number one film of 2022.
Yeah, you don't want to guess mine?
I don't have as clear an idea on yours. I am going to guess it. Can you? All right. I'm going to say if it is what I'm going to guess, then it'll be history for our show because it's possible. That means if it's Tar, then it's, all three of us have Tar on our top 10 of top 10 list. Is that what it is?
Well, cheers. It's Tar.
There we go.
Cheers. That's crazy.
The history for, I mean, like we've said it a couple times. For those of you that jump ahead to number one, this is the first time that we've done this where we have two films make all three lists. It's only happened twice in our 8-year history. Again, Phantom Thread in 2017 and Dune last year. And on this particular list with Mel and Max, two people that I disagree with just about as much as anybody. I only have two Best Picture nominees on my list, and they're Tar and the Banshees of Inisherin. And those are the two that we all have on our list, strangely enough. So cheers. Very exciting. I love history. I love it when we have that simpatico. Is there anything else you'd like to add about Tar?
I was taken by like every part of this movie. I thought it was so excellently crafted and directed and did interesting things, was talking about an interesting thing. I thought Cate Blanchett was amazing. I thought her performance was so good. There was so much like specificity in every part of this movie for me. Just details in the script, even her daughter wanting them to like hold her foot. I'm like, yes, give me specificity and weird like things that make something feel real. I thought it was also such a great portrait of like an artist, like a talented artist who's really dedicated to their craft, and little moments I was like, oh my gosh, that's what it feels like to try to make something. It had me so like captivated by this character and then so horrified by her at the end.
And so now I am time for me to reveal my number one film of 2022. And so once again, controversy is likely to get stirred here. And so I've actually ordered some bodyguards so people don't try and come and track me down. For the first non-pandemic year, my number one film is a film that I did not see in theaters. Last year, I floored my fellow panelists when my number one film turned out to be an animated film. It seemed to be an anomaly, but here I am again with a film nominated for the Oscar for Best Animated Film, even though I question the placement in this category because it's only partially animated.
Oh my
so you
goodness.
probably figured out that my number one film of 2022 is Marcel the Shell with the Shoes On. I expected it to start out as a small, cute idea, but whether it knows it or not, it sort of becomes everything. I think its focus was a childlike perception on change and coming to terms with the ever-evolving world around us. The most seismic changes have to do with grief and coping with the loss of loved ones in whatever form that takes. The film also bluntly discusses community, but what it really becomes about is connection. Both Dean and Marcel start the film dealing with and suffering from loss and a significant change in their lives, but both benefit from the relationship that they forge. Marcel can't replace a separated wife per se, but he can fill something of a hole in Dean's heart and vice versa. By extension of that, the film almost inadvertently becomes about the documentary form itself, particularly as it relates to the relationship between filmmaker and subject. It's a tenuous relationship because a blurring of those lines can also distort the lines between truth and fiction. It can dispel the purity of the documentary, which defeats the purpose. As a work of fiction, no danger of that in this film per se, but I think the story suggests that potential in an interesting way. I dragged my feet to this one and was once again surprised, if not swept away. Emotionally affected and cerebrally challenged. Like I said, everything. Everything you'd want a movie to do. Marcel the Shell with Shoes On is my number one movie of 2022. Any chance out of the few movies you guys seen, did you watch that film?
No, but I want
Do
to.
you guys see animated films?
No, I watched Turning Red.
But Turning Red is top 20 for me. I enjoyed that one.
Oh, I enjoyed it too. It was fun. Yeah.
A good evening. Good show, JB.
Do you guys have fun?
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, we're gonna have
Thumbs
more
up.
fun because we have to. You know, the fans love this. You can argue that it's a bit negative, but you know, a lot of times the panelists love to name their least favorite film of the year. And so, Mel, you get to go first in telling us what your least out of the 24 you watched. What was your least favorite?
This is so hard. I had 3 on this list, and I'm so hesitant to be honest about the movie that was hardest for me to get through, which was Women Talking. I hate that this is my answer, but I almost didn't finish it because it was really not landing for me, and that makes me so sad. Because I don't think it's like the worst craft movie I saw, but it was the hardest for me to get through. So that's my honest answer.
It's only the second time this has ever happened where somebody's worst movie of the year is on someone else's list. In 2019, I had Ad Astra as my #1 film of 2019. It was somebody else's on the worst movie of the year on that same panel. So Max, I feel your pain. I've been there.
I'm so sorry.
For all your agreements, having 5 crossover movies, you do have a little bit of disconnect there. So I feel a little better.
I'm torn because there are 2 movies that were sort of difficult for me. Bardo was the hardest, I think, to get through, but I actually appreciated a lot of it. And there's another movie that was much easier to get through, but I just thought was not nearly what the critics were raving about. To Leslie.
Oh yeah, that was on my list of one of my worst 3.
I will give it to the whole hoopla about the lead actress.
Yeah.
I thought she did a brilliant job, but this was not a super strong film, I thought.
No, Act 3 especially not good.
I didn't hate To Leslie, right in the middle of the pack, for me potentially. The vast majority of the film to me felt like a raw, gritty 70s character piece that the final act undercuts, in that the arc feels a little too easy ultimately. And I don't know if that's what Mel was referring to, at least given how comprehensive the portrait of addiction was. More than addiction, however, it becomes about self-love as an opportunity to dig yourself out of the holes, which are often self-created anyway. The fact that she won the lottery in the past becomes important to solidify that point. There are times when the direction is confident and assured, but there is an over-reliance on handheld, and the scenes where he chose to do that versus when he didn't seem to make sense. The tonal edge that the film had for 2/3 of it was lost, and that's on the director to maintain. It turned a little sappy, saccharine in the third act. I do think the performance was really, really strong. I think Leslie's a thorough creation, and there are many years where it might have been the best in the year. It's just not this year. There's just too much outstanding work. The other performances are strong, though. I even like Mark Maron. There's a lot of. I actually thought there was a lot of great qualities to the film, and I think there's a lot of promise for director Michael Morris. I hear what you're saying, Max, in terms of the quibbles, but it sounds like I liked it a little better than you. I mean, like it didn't sniff my top 10, probably even the top 20, but it might be in the upper half of my 100.
All right.
So it's not much of a rebuttal from me, but it wasn't one of the ones I'm like, I cannot believe this. All right, Mel, you ready for my worst?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to name every film on Mel's list as my worst.
Well,
Is it Saint Omer?
No, it is not. There were 2 films I intensely disliked this year, but I opted to go with this one in the theory that it's the one with the larger budget, so I feel like they have less of an excuse, more resources at their fingertips. Generally, when a film is being buzzed as being terrible, I find the hype overblown and tend to like the films. Cats is an example. Music from 2020. Babylon are movies that were supposed to be terrible that I wound up liking, and in Babylon's case, truly loving. But in this case, the ire is justified for David O. Russell's Amsterdam. It was as much of a mess as advertised. The indiscriminate use of voiceover was a desperate attempt to link the convoluted plot together, an extremely lazy approach. What's most upsetting about the whole affair is that there's a great story at the center of this. Not just a good one, but a great one with a lot of potential that O. Russell lost the ability to take seriously. Not only did his tongue-in-cheek approach not quite work, it created a situation where he was dealing more with caricatures than characters. A satirical approach might have been okay, but the wild, untethered style of the piece was too random and too ill-conceived. The filmmaking choices were often just bizarre. Everything felt disconnected spatially, and that has not an insignificant impact on the film. Back and forth with the voiceover, the randomness of the timeline made the film feel like it had a lack of direction. And Mel earlier was talking about control, and we were talking about directors, and this film felt out of control. It's not the first film to connect the rise of fascism in the 30s to current events, but it might be among the worst. It's trite and obvious and not really explored in an interesting manner. I've got Amsterdam, guys, as my worst film of 2022. Any thoughts or comments?
I didn't see it.
I didn't either. You wanted to go see it with me, JB, and I was like, I don't want to watch that movie.
All right.
I auditioned for a small part in it, but I didn't see it.
All right, guys, it's time to close things out. So here's what we got going on. And we got a full week ahead of shows for our finale. On Thursday, March 9th, will be our 1947 review with Devin and Jim, where we go over the Oscar races and the films of 1947, 75 years ago. But tomorrow, March the 8th, is our Oscar preview. Some of these films that we talked about tonight are Oscar nominees, but many are not. Check out what we choose. We're going to tell you what we think will win, what we think should win, and what should have been nominated in several of the categories. So we'll see you tomorrow night for that. In the meantime, say goodbye to the audience, Mel and Max.
Bye.
Mel's first show, so that's exciting. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society, until tomorrow, is adjourned.